Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks where kindred souls gather together to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as the February Room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for composite development fly rods and accessories. 40 years of Kiwi ingenuity and graphite technology, now available at cd-fishing.us or your local CD USA dealer. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And remember to go fishing. Here's your host, the Carnops, and this is the February Room.
Our guest today is one of the hardest working guys in outdoor journalism. He is the fishing and supervising editor of MeatEater and a bona fide fishing and hunting junkie. Sam Lungren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Good to hear from you, buddy.
Yeah, you too, boss. I appreciate you taking the time, man. I know you just got back from Belize, so you're probably scrambling to get caught up on work.
Oh, yeah, I am to a certain degree, but luckily we had Wi-Fi down there, and I kind of stayed on top of it. So I'm just cruising. I'm always busy though, so I don't know. It doesn't seem abnormally overworked right now.
Well, good deal, man. Well, we like to start things off with a fishing story around here. Do you have one teed up for us?
Yeah, well, you brought up a pretty good one right before we started recording. As you mentioned, I was in Belize last week, and we were fishing our faces off, obviously. So there's plenty of stories. It's all starting to kind of meld together, honestly. Just lots of really finicky permit that hurt my feelings. That are kind of becoming a monolith in my memory. But yeah, we did get into a big school of kind of medium-sized tarpon one of the days, and that was certainly an experience I won't forget anytime soon, as I'm sure you can understand.
Yeah, man. I've had similar experiences as you just had in Belize. The permit have always just kind of baffled and frustrated me. I've cast probably 100 of them. And the tarpon have always kind of saved the day. I've had some pretty awesome tarpon fishing down there, and those 30, 50, 60 pounders that you get into in Belize are just perfect on a fly rod in my mind.
Yeah, man, I can't think of something that's more fun than a 50, 60 pound tarpon. Yeah, I think it was our third day down there. We were out chasing permit all day, and we saw probably anywhere from 10 to 40 every day we went out, a lot of them tailing up on shallow, reefs, or the kind of coral bars, if you will.
Right.
But man, they were just being picky as all hell and super jumpy. And the guides were telling us that, with the weather and everything, it was just hard as it could get. But anyway, we got done with the day and headed back to the lodge, and a couple of the guys who are working on renovating this old lodge that they're putting a bunch of new touches on. They're like, "Hey, there's a bunch of tarpon rolling out front." We're like, "Oh, well, guess we should probably go back out then." And the guide's like, "Yep, grab your 12 weight." He went and borrowed a sinking like a full sink line from the GM, and the GM gave us a couple of those gummy minnows that I think Blaine Chocolate invented, because he invents all the cool flies these days. And we went out there and just kind of anchored up on the edge of the flat in front of the lodge, kind of hanging out over about 40 feet of water, and could see tarpon splashing around out a little bit further. And I just started blasting that 12 weight out there and letting it sink. And on my first cast, I brought the fly back over a sandbar so you could kind of see what was going on. And I was like, "Oh man, there's a big barracuda behind it." And the guide goes, "No, Mom, that's a tarpon." and it burned out of there. And then I cast again, and it got bumped. And I cast again, and I had another one follow. And then, kind of we were just in them, and I think it was like the 6th or 7th cast, and came tight on one, and it just dumped offline and started jumping. That was probably 50, 60 pounder, and survived 5 jumps with it. Had it on for about 10 or 15 minutes. The everybody at the lodge was out on the beach taking photos and stuff. The GM flew a drone out over us, trying to capture that. He didn't get it on the drone, I don't think, but he got a great video just with his cell phone from the beach of that fish jumping. But man, I thought I had it whooped. It was just diving down deep. I felt it wearing out. I was working it up. I felt like I was fighting a halibut, kind of laying the cork into it, then reeling down hard, then lifting slowly and reeling down hard. And I was bringing it up, stout 12 weight with a good drag, but somehow it just shook its head and spit that hook out, which was, they sure do, man. I hooked my first tarpon when I was 14, and I'm 32 now, and I still haven't landed one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're not alone there, and I'm still very much in the permit drolls. I'm in the doldrums there. I'm kind of mad at those fish right now. I need a little break. I got super lucky on my first tarpon in Belize. I was out with my dad, and this was like 20 years ago, and we'd been permit fishing all day and hadn't caught anything, of course. And we did get some bonefish. My dad got some bonefish, so he was content. And we went out right before dark to this cut, and we were just kind of blind casting. And I'd never hooked anything big on a fly rod before up to that point, anything like that. And, the fly just stopped, and I thought I was caught on the bottom. And then it started swimming, and the thing jumped like 5 times. I didn't know what I was doing, but it just had hooked itself so that it wasn't going to come off, and I caught it with my dad. So that was a pretty awesome. Pretty awesome memory. Yeah, it was really cool.
That's cool, man. What part of Belize were you in?
The first couple times I went down there, we were fishing out of Southwater Key.
Yeah, we actually went up and fished around the docks of Southwater Key for bonefish the last day.
Yeah, that's the exact same spot. I'm sure that my dad caught his. That's a cool place.
It is a cool place. Yeah, they were saying that the bonefish got really netted out in that area, and we didn't. A couple of the other guys saw one bonefish one of the days fishing for permit, but I never saw a single bonefish except when we ran all the way up there. We were on Northeast Key at the Blue Horizon Lodge, and we ran all the way up there to Southwater, and we're literally casting up to a dive boat that they were loading tanks onto in front of the lodge there. But there was a massive school of bones swimming around. There were some pretty big ones in there. And then we went around the other side of the island, and there was another big school. But yeah, that's how we got to go have our little bit of go get our consolation prize from the permit beating us up.
One of my buddies lived out on Southwater for a while, and he would take an indicator and a hare's ear and just pound on those bonefish.
Oh, that's hilarious, man.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, I totally believe it, though, because I probably put 20 flies in front of those fish, and you would show them one a couple times and get a swipe, hook one, lose it, or, get just rejected, and you put a new fly in there, and it was like a whole new ball game. But I borrowed a fly box from my good buddy and colleague, Miles Nolte, who's the director of fishing at MeatEater, and he's from Hawaii. So grew up fishing for those super finicky, picky bones around Honolulu, and had all these really badass, super lightweight, super sparse bonefish patterns. And one of the boats from our group, when it was around the other side of the island first, and messing with those bonefish, and didn't catch any of them, and came around, asked how we were doing, and we'd caught a couple, and then we kind of switched up, and we went over there, and when we got on that school of bonefish, I caught one on the first cast with one of Miles's flies.
Cool.
Yeah, it was super cool little sparse shrimp pattern.
Nice. So this kind of this notion that some anglers have right now that the fish the permit haven't been unmolested and they're going to be bitey. That's not necessarily coming to fruition in your experience, huh?
No. It did not. That was not my experience in the slightest. But again, I have to wonder about the climatic conditions. The weather was getting snotty the first day we were there, and the first day we had 2 really good shots at tailing permit. I had the first one, and it was a hard shot. I waded up into these mangroves, and I was casting straight into about 30-mile-an-hour wind. But got the crab in front of a permit and got it to follow almost to the rod tip, and it just freaking saw me. So it was behaving aggressively, as far as permit go. I mean, it charged the fly and just wouldn't commit, but it was very interested. And then about an hour later, we ran into one in a lot deeper water, and my buddy just put a fly in front of it and it ate it. And he fought it almost to the boat, and it broke the fly. But then the next 4 days, man, it was just, the weather was just kind of mixed up. And, I can't claim to be any sort of expert on flats fishing, but I know with trout and bass, steelhead, that stability in the barometer in the weather patterns tends to be useful. And sometimes, a lot of times, in fact, when the barometer's falling, when snotty weather's coming, the fishing can be really good because they know, this is pure speculation. There really isn't a lot of science to back this up, but you can guess that the fish might know the bad weather's coming, so the getting's good, because they're not usually feeding as hard when it's bad. But yeah, those 4 days, man, it really it was truly humbling, the most humbling angling experience I've ever had. And so there's times that you get to thinking that you're a good fisherman or something, and then you go try to fish for permit, and you're like, oh yeah, actually I kind of suck at this. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I don't know how I can claim to be. I don't know how I can claim to be the fishing editor of a major outdoors media outlet. But yeah, they just, so many times, man, like I felt like, there was like a couple dozen times when I felt like I did everything right, where I snuck in on a happy tailing bonefish and put a cast exactly where the guide told me to. They're like 1.5 feet in front of his face, and drop it gently and put that fly in there, and they just go look at it, then move off, or just swim right past it, or look at it and follow it for a slow strip and then turn off, or just flush, and the guides are telling me to put it on his nose, but even when you do that, sometimes they just spook, and they were being exceptionally spooky for what the guides said. But there were guys out there who were catching permit. The guides were saying, oh, that's Will Flack's boat. The Sims guy with the permit tattoo on his neck, and he was guiding Brewster Levens out of Twin Bridges, and they caught, I think they caught 3 that week, and they were using this big, ugly, ridiculous fly that all of our guides laughed about. So yeah, it's just so hard. It's just such a mental game too, especially with the flies, man. God, that brings up a whole other thing, because these guys down there, and to provide just a little bit more context, this lodge was founded by a guy named Lincoln Westby, who's been guiding permit on those flats for 40 years, and he just turned 80 this year, and really pioneered that permit fishery. Founded the Blue Horizon Lodge in the early 90s, I think, and is still the head guide out there. It's since been acquired and kind of remodeled by by a resort chain. But you know, he's the godfather of that fishery, and all these other guides, you know, look up to him, just, you know, like an absolute king among kings for this saltwater flats fishing. And he and Will Bauer, who I think was the owner of the fly shop in Redding back in the day,
Yeah, he inventor of the Bauer crab.
Exactly. Right? So guess what fly they fish exclusively?
Yeah, I've been on that program. So yeah.
Yeah, man. And like they told me that, and I tied a bunch of my own Bauer crabs. Just because I was so damn excited, I didn't know what to do with my hands before going down on this trip. I was just tying Bauer crabs. They didn't like mine for some reason because I made. Sorry, my dog's chewing on his duck
Sounds
toy
like a
that
parrot.
Quacks. Yeah, it's a duck toy that quacks. Yeah, so they have this, like, you know, almost slavish devotion to the Bauer crab, and I get it. I mean, like, Lungren is personally responsible for catching over 2,000 permit, and that's just since he's had the lodge, just since he started counting. And he said it's like 90% of that's on the Bauer crab. So on one hand, you gotta take the man's word for it. He's an amazing guy, amazing wealth of knowledge, so kind, so generous. But I saw so many permit refuse that Bauer crab. And I also didn't like how it fished because we were in really shallow water sometimes, and it in that the shot pattern is pretty heavy. And
it lands pretty hard.
It lands hard, and then it sinks into the coral really quickly. And they keep telling you to like if you have a permit's interest, the best thing you can do is to let it fall, because that's what a crab would do, right? It would like dive down and try to get into the coral before the fish could eat it. But you know, when you do that, you're always in danger of hanging up. And we hung up a ton of times. Like there was a couple times where my buddy Nick hung up and the fish kept tailing and was still hanging out. Now we like grabbed another rod and swapped out, and he kept fishing with like a hung up fly line in the way. You know? And so I wanted to fish something that wasn't as heavy, that would kind of drift on the current a little bit more, because there's a lot of current in a lot of the places and a lot of just wind chop. Like we were literally casting into standing waves for some of these permit, just because there was so much chop coming off the sea and hitting these bars and piling up and breaking and white capping and stuff. It was wet and wild, man. It was like trout fishing in a river in some of these situations. Right. But man, I saw so many refuse that Bauer crab, and it was hard. And we had real time knowledge of what our friends were catching them on in that same area. And also I had another friend in San Pedro who they were catching permit, and another friend who was in Playa Blanca in Mexico that same week, and they were catching permit. Goes to show just what the weather can do for permit fishing.
And now a brief message from our sponsors. Fly Lab Reels provide silky smooth disc drags at a click and pawl price. Paired with mid-arbor spool for quick line retrieval, the Fly Lab family of fishing reels is the best value on the river. With 4 models to choose from, priced from $99 to $249, you won't find these reels anywhere other than the local CD dealer or at cd-fishing.us. And remember to go fishing.
So you grew up in Puget Sound in Seattle, right?
Sure did.
Can you tell me kind of, Whidbey Island, that's right, man. Can you kind of describe for us what it was like growing up there from a fishing standpoint?
Yeah, man. It was immersive. I was out fishing for salmon and halibut long before I could walk. My parents lived in Bellevue, kind of like east side of Seattle, until I was 2, and then we moved up to Whidbey. They got a place on a little harbor, on a high bluff with stairs down to a dock on the beach. And my dad's a diehard fisherman, so I can't claim to have that any of this was my volition. But there's pictures of me in a stroller. Or a child seat out in his boat with him trolling for salmon in front of the house and around the island and stuff when I was a like a toddler. We had a couple little lakes within about 2 miles of our house, and my godparents bought a house and moved to one of those when I was really young, and so we had a dock and a boat we could use on a little lake too. That was a bike ride from the house, or 2-minute drive, just for little stalker rainbows in that lake. And then there's another lake a little farther that had bigger wild rainbows and largemouth bass. But yeah, grew up fishing a ton for salmon. Whidbey Island is kind of like a barrier right at the entry of the Strait of Juan de Fuca. That cut between the Olympic Peninsula and Vancouver Island. So like every salmon that comes into Puget Sound passes through there, and the first thing they hit is Whidbey. And so millions every year hit Whidbey and then follow the beaches down the island to their various spawning streams. So there's a lot of points and beaches that are very popular for surf casting for salmon, and I did a ton of that growing up, launching buzz bombs off the beaches. My mom would like pick me up from school and pick up a buddy and like drop us off at the beach for the day, and then come pick us up at dark. Go catch a couple cohos or pinks, but we'd bump into Chinook doing that too. I mean, I don't think I ever ended up landing one, but I mean, I definitely saw people land 30-pound kings off the beach on a handful of occasions. But yeah, as I said, my dad's a super serious fisherman and hunter, and just water guy, and we always had a lot of different boats and lived on the water. And so I was running power boats long before I was driving cars. And even as a kid, I would go down to the beach and take out a kayak or a Zodiac dinghy and row around and catch flounder and rockfish and sea run cutthroat sometimes, and all sorts of stuff. And then later into my growth as an angler, my dad and I got really into lingcod fishing, and really kind of developed a style that's picked up in recent years, but people weren't talking about it back then, which was casting and retrieving up into rocky areas, especially around the north end of the island, around like Deception Pass Bridge and up into the San Juans, and casting spinner baits and inline spinners. And then later we found out about swim baits coming out of Southern California. And we were casting, it was basically just muskie and pike and like giant bass gear that we got once we figured out that these big lingcod actually live in really shallow, because the standard kind of conventional wisdom with lingcod is that you jig down deep and you're looking for structure in 100 to 300 feet of water. But we saw these other guys catch a lingcod in shallow, and they left, and we went in there and caught a nice one in like 20 feet of water. And so we got really into that. And lingcod season's only like a month and a half long in Washington, but we got to the point where we were pretty much going out every day, even when I had school. There was one time where I showed up at my homeroom class an hour late, but the principal walked me in and did like the Jedi mind tricks, motion with his hand, and said he's excused. And
he reeks of lingcod.
And that was because my dad had invited him out lingcod fishing with us that morning, and he stuck like a 10-pounder. We took a bunch of my teachers out fishing, but yeah, we would go out for an hour before school in the morning and often catch a limit of ling, and we ended up catching some really nice ones. I mean, I got one that was over 30, and my dad got one that was over 50, and that one was in 25 feet of water.
Wow. And you experimented with flies on those too, right?
I did. Yeah, that was later. That was once I started freelancing for fishing magazines, in like grad school and beyond in my early 20s. But I went back for a season, and some friends and I took a took a bunch of tarpon gear out, and we went out to the same spots where where my dad and I developed some of those techniques, and started winging around some big giant flies, and we all three of us landed a lingcod on the fly, and a couple of them were visual takes, which was
Oh, wow.
pretty incredible, man. And in the past, I've even seen them break the surface, like when you're cranking hard to rip a big plastic bait up over a kelp mat, like lingcod will blow it up just like a pike.
Wow.
It's one of the coolest fisheries in the world. They're like musky. I've used this line a tons of times, but they're like muskies, like inner city saltwater cousins that are full, like covered in spines and leopard print tattoos, and get way bigger.
Yeah. They're gnarly fish, man. I've had some experiences with them. I was beating my head against the wall to catch one on a fly. This was a long time ago, but I had read a book by John Shuey, and he described going out on the jetties at night, and so I tried like hell to get one doing that, and damn near drowned a couple of times. And I believe I finally hooked one. I never saw it, but I hooked something big one night, and it went down and it dug in, and I had to cut my fly line off. So yeah.
Yeah, that's adding insult to injury.
Yeah. So I shelved the idea after that, and then I remember talking to you some time ago when we were tying flies that one night, I think, and you were kind of telling me about your experiences with them up there, and definitely kind of rekindled my interest, because I think there's a place on the south coast of Oregon where I've jigged them before, but it was only in like 20 or 25 feet of water, and I think you could get them on flies in there too.
Yeah, I bet you could. And it's interesting, man, because lingcod certainly have different patterns and behaviors in different areas. And I commercial fished in Prince William Sound, Alaska, for 4 summers through college and grad school, and it's super similar kind of habitat waters. It looks a lot like the San Juans, really steep, rocky, kind of cliffy stuff coming straight into the water, drop offs and rock piles and pinnacles. And every night we were anchoring up and stuff like that in some little cove after delivering our fish. And I can't tell you how many times I chucked swim baits and Point Wilson darts and all that stuff in shallow looking for lingcod. And this is like 4 whole summers of trying to do that, and you'd pick up a little bitty lingcod in there every now and then, but never ever saw a big one in shallow. We did catch some big lingcod, but it was always when we were jigging for halibut, way out deep on the shoals and in some kind of deep area between islands, and more traditional lingcod stuff, even some pinnacles and whatnot. So I've always been intrigued by that fact that big ones will live really shallow in Washington, but not in Alaska. And I have to wonder if it has something to do with Washington's had a giant die off of its rockfish population, and the cod are gone. And so you got to wonder if those lingcod are kind of responding to that lack of prey and getting in shallow to eat the flounder and the sand dabs, and kind of taking on a different prey species.
Yeah, and I've even wondered, because where I've fished them down on the south coast, you've got the Rogue, the Elk, the Chetco rivers coming in, and the Lings are shallow in there. So I wondered if they didn't, target steelhead and salmon smolt going out. And I mean, a 50-pounder could eat an adult steelhead.
A 20-pounder could eat an adult steelhead.
Yeah, right. So this is just total speculation, but I've also wondered if those fish were in kind of shallow too, taking advantage of the anadromous fish at the river mouths.
Yeah, that's a real good point, man. I bet that I bet that would hold water. And I've heard, and like the everybody's biggest lingcod is caught on something else. Like the biggest one I saw my buddy caught in Alaska ate like a 9-pound arrow tooth flounder. It's probably a 40-pound ling, and it had it like sideways in its mouth. And I've heard of people fighting a pink salmon on the beach and having lingcod come up and eat it. So I know they eat salmon, and I would absolutely imagine that's accurate.
Well, speaking of salmon and steelhead, I'm sure the present state of those runs weigh heavily on your mind.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest issues at hand here in our neck of the woods is the removal of the four dams on the Lower Snake. I understand that your colleague Ryan O'Callahan was recently the moderator of a roundtable discussion. Can you give us a kind of a synopsis on that proposal?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, that proposal comes from Mike Simpson, a congressman from Idaho, who's a relatively conservative Republican. Which it's interesting to see this massive environmentalist proposal coming out of that wing. But I've been following his statements on the state of Idaho salmon and steelhead for a long time, and he said a lot of really interesting things about how he believes it would be a sin against God to allow steelhead and salmon to go extinct in Idaho. And I really think that that's a guiding force for him, that he feels like it would be a great injustice to the world and to the fish and to the people, especially indigenous communities, to allow these amazing runs to blip out. So he's been talking about this for a long time, and we knew through our back channels that they'd been working on this proposal for a long time. And I got a little bit of a preview of it and wrote an article about it. But basically, what this proposal is and if people say that this is a proposal to tear down the dams, like that is just simply reductionist. That's not really what it is. It's a like a fundamental rethinking of the energy infrastructure of the Pacific Northwest, and the shipping infrastructure for getting Idaho and kind of the greater inland empires agricultural products to market, and within that is the removal of those dams. But you can't just tear down those dams. It's not going to work that way. It's not going to, people aren't going to accept that, and it would also really hamstring certain elements of our society. So what he's talking about is finding ways to replace that lost energy. And to be clear, those four dams on the Lower Snake were not designed for energy production. They were designed for barge traffic. So they made the Lower Snake River into a series of lakes, pretty much, so that barges full of wheat and potatoes and whatnot coming out of Lewiston, Idaho, could get out to Astoria, Washington, or to Portland, or wherever it may be. So they don't produce much in the way of megawattage, and it's typically used as kind of like a backup system for when some of the other more important dams in the Columbia Basin aren't firing on all cylinders. But it's like on an average year, it's less than 5% of the grid's production from the 30 something dams in the Columbia Basin. But so first of all, it's replacing that lost energy with truly renewable energy, because hydroelectric clearly isn't renewable. If it's depleting, and people love to say that, but I'm like, well, it's depleting the salmon resources. So
Right.
how is that renewable? And plus, like, the Bonneville Power Administration, the federal agency that operates those dams, has dumped something like $17 billion into storing these salmon, and they're worse than they've ever been. And they keep being like, well, we've got this new idea for these new type of turbines, and it's only going to cost. And it never works. And it's like, the turbines probably aren't the totality of the problem. I mean, it's like the smallmouth bass and the northern pike minnow and the walleye, and it's the temperature of this lower Snake River. Like, there was a couple years ago when Idaho lost pretty much its entire sockeye run, which only goes back to Redfish Lake. I think they had some 2,000 coming back that were counted at Bonneville, and 75% of them died in the Snake because the water was so hot. And you can't change that if you have those dams, because the water isn't moving. And kind of another major element of this proposal is they're going to buy and rebuild a rail line to replace the lost barge traffic, because the loudest opponents to this idea, and this idea of taking the dams out of the Snake has been around for my whole life. Like, I've been hearing about this for 20 years, but the people always screaming the loudest against it are the wheat producers. And I went to college in Eastern Washington and knew a lot of wheat farmers because I like to hunt whitetails on their places. And I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they're like, well, yeah, but I mean, how are we gonna get our wheat to market? And most of that stuff's going to Asian markets, which is why it needs to go out the mouth of the Columbia. It's neither here nor there, but still, it's important that we facilitate that. So, basically what they did, and I've interviewed his staff about this a number of times, is they said, we started off by saying, how do we keep Idaho salmon and steelhead and keep the dams? And exhausted every situation and realized that, that wasn't really possible. And then after that, they said, like, how do we maintain Idaho salmon and steelhead and remove the dams and keep everyone whole? It's just really nice to see, because it's like such a holistic, bipartisan process that's really trying to meet everyone's concerns and do it in a way that doesn't really, anyone over, pardon my language. And I really respect that. It's going to be expensive. It's a $32 billion proposal, and it's supposed to, take about 10 years. With actual dam removal being kind of the last step. So it's like building wind turbines, it's rebuilding this rail line, it's drawing down those reservoirs, rebuilding the Lewiston, Clarkston kind of waterfront, because they have a nice waterfront now, but now it's going to be like 300 yards away from the water, separated by a giant mud flat. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm hopeful that this proposal does go somewhere. There's a lot of talk about infrastructure projects, but I've been disappointed to hear that it hasn't been seized on with more enthusiasm from Washington's congressional delegation, which, as you're aware, is primarily Democratic. But even the Republicans, like Kathy McMorris Rogers, Dan Newhouse from representing Eastern Washington, they hate this. They have always hated this. They're diehard dam supporters. That's what they think their constituents want. You're probably never going to get them, even though they may be in the same caucus as Mike Simpson. But all the legislators coming from the west side of Washington, including both of the senators, haven't embraced this, really, and that's very disappointing. And definitely smacks of partisanship. They don't want to follow along with Republicans' plan. They think they could do it better, but I don't think it's going to get any better than this. And I think the failure to act, we're going to see the consequences very, very soon if nothing's done about that system. and it will collapse one of the most important fishing economies in the country, and one of the greatest fisheries in the world. I mean, when I was living in Missoula, I fished the salmon in the Clearwater all the time, and it's just some of the coolest stuff, man. It would be, just such a shame to see that blip out.
Yeah, I just sincerely hope that we can get it all resolved in time, and the fish don't vanish or become genetically obsolete before drastic measures can be taken, because we're at the point where we need drastic measures.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this has been going on so long, and it's just been the elephant in the room. It's time to. I know it's expensive, and people like to argue with me about this. They're like, oh, the federal debt isn't big enough. I'm like, well, I mean, is that really your concern? I mean, it's already like $50 trillion or whatever. Like, like you're really worried right now. Like, or is that your real concern? Because salmon and steelhead runs to me are invaluable. It's you're not able to put a price tag on it. Money doesn't, economics cannot comprehend the value of those species. And to try to do that, I think is an insult to anglers, to native communities, and to wild ecosystems.
Yeah, and to a species that's been around since time immemorial. And the thing with dam removal too. Now I know this is on a much smaller scale, but it seems like such an just complex and daunting task to people. But they took down the Milltown Dam here in what I think 2008 or something, and it was really kind of rather anticlimactic to watch. Like there was no surge of water that flooded the valley or anything like that, and obviously there's been a concerted effort to do all of the cleanup from the mining tailings from the Butte region and everything, but the Clark Fork River has really responded, and it's never been, in the time that I've lived here, it's never been a healthier stream than it is now.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean it's that's again a microcosm of what we're looking at on the removal of the 4 dams on the Lower Snake, but it is possible. If you can build a dam, you can take one down.
Absolutely. And, I did my my undergraduate thesis on the Elwha River dam removal project, which is just, a little ways past where I grew up, kind of right outside of Port Angeles. And previously had been the largest dam removal project in the history of the world, and was talked about for a long time, caked off a really great productive river that was known to hold like 90 and 100-pound Chinook a long time ago, and blocked it off 3 miles from the ocean. And that was completed in, I think, 2013. And I'm really good friends with John McMillan, who used to work for NOAA as a biologist, but now is the science director of Trout Unlimited's steelhead effort. What is it? Wild Steelheaders United. And he, has been very instrumental in that Elwha project, and goes and snorkels it several times a year. And it's incredible how the fish have responded. They thought it was going to be a 30-year recovery timeline. They thought they were going to have to be restocking fish way up in the national park to kind of jumpstart it. But it's like, they were finding big native steelhead above the lower dam site weeks after it was gone.
Wow.
When they thought the river conditions couldn't support fish, they were finding steelhead that were moving up through there. Then a couple months later, they're finding paired up spawning Chinook above there. And now they're seeing like relatively robust populations. And I say relatively robust because, no Chinook or steelhead population in North America is really killing it right now. But, they're in the thousands, and they had completely lost their summer run steelhead. There wasn't a summer run steelhead run in the Elwha, and now they're getting like 2,000 of them back every year. And so this is like completely colonizing behavior in these salmon, which scientists don't understand super well, how salmon will colonize new habitats, because obviously they're really well known for homing, going back to where they were born, but a certain segment of each population will specifically not go where they were born and kind of explore and see if there's greener pastures. And so we're really seeing the power of that in the Elwha, and the Chinook are coming back strong, the steelhead are coming back strong. The sockeye run was also dead, and now there's suddenly a sockeye run going back to Lake Pleasant, which is like off a tributary, and they think that came about because there were kokanee in there. And they think the kokanee may have discovered a path to the ocean and became sockeye again.
That's interesting.
So yeah, the meddling we do as humans is truly no match for the ability for nature to recover when we give it that opportunity. And that's just what we have to do in Idaho, is we just need to, we know these dams are detrimental, and we just need to get them out of the way and let those fish do their thing, and try not to muck it up too much by, backfilling with hatcheries and trucking them around and this and that and the other thing. I mean, we need to monitor it. We need to look for problem points. We need to fix irrigation intakes and culverts. And there's a lot of work to be done, but a lot of the salmon basin especially is in really pristine shape, and the Clearwater too. I mean, a lot, like the entire Locksaw and Selway are like all protected in like wild and scenic river and wilderness, and like the middle fork of the salmon is one of the most pristine ecosystems remaining in the world. It's in the middle of the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness. I floated through there, and it's like you've never seen clearer water, you've never seen more just intact habitat, and I think given the chance, that those fish are going to come bouncing back. And yeah, sure, there's lots of problems going on in the North Pacific too. The whole blob has returned, that patch of really warm water, right, and ocean survival conditions aren't great. We've got a problem with predators at the mouth of the Columbia in the form of sea lions. But we're working on that. They're whacking and stacking those good sea lions, man. They're killing like 900 of them a year now, which I find just like it's so amusing that like all the liberal Democrats from Seattle were supportive of that, and the Seattle Times editorial board came out in favor of that, and came out in favor of expanding it to include like Lake Washington and the Ballard Locks, and they're like, let's kill all the sea lions. And I'm like, well, I mean, the sea lions are just responding to a man-made bottleneck. So it's our fault, but it's also not the worst thing in the world. Once you start managing an ecosystem, you really have to manage it. So right. I'm very much in favor of killing those sea lions, because we found that you can't remove them. They just come back no matter where you take them to. They did that with a famous big old male at the Ballard Locks when I was a kid. They trapped it and took it down to San Francisco, where there's a giant colony, right there in the harbor, on the waterfront. Right. Yeah. It was a collared lion, and they released it. It was back at the Ballard Locks in 2 weeks.
Wow. That's crazy.
There's a lot of problems, man, but these dam removal projects, and there's another big one that's becoming a very real possibility on the Klamath too, and they're talking about it on the Rogue, and smaller projects on like Malibu, even like Malibu Creek in Southern California, Ventura Creek. I really think we built these dams with a low degree of understanding of the effects they would have, and I think it's the right thing to do in many situations to get rid of them. I'm not saying that everywhere. I mean, like my trout buddies would shoot me for suggesting we take out the Yellowtail Dam on the Bighorn or the Holter Dam on the Missouri. The dams can be useful, can be helpful, but anywhere there's anadromous fish, it just doesn't really work that well. And I mean, they're even doing it on the Penobscot.
Yeah.
In the East Coast, there's a lot of similar projects going on around the world, and I think it's good that humanity's kind of come around to the idea that these dams, we've got to think of them as temporary, and once they've served their purpose or are no longer serving a good purpose, it's well worth the investment to get them out of there.
Well, amen, man. And with that, what's the best method for folks to get in touch with you and to follow what you're doing? You do an amazing job of keeping everybody up to speed on the issues that concern hunters and anglers. So thanks for that. And how do they keep in touch with you?
Yeah, you can give me a follow on Instagram. I'm at Sam Lungren Media. Lungren is Lungren. But yeah, just check out the MeatEater website. Sign up for our newsletter. We've got a ton of great articles every week on everything from just goofy, funny stuff in our barroom banter series. I'm writing one about the world record tsunami that happened in Alaska right now, which is not useful information, but it's interesting, it's fun, it's humorous. But I'm also working on stuff about some controversial bills in the Montana, New Mexico legislatures right now, so we really run the gamut there. So yeah, go to themeateater.com, sign up for our newsletter, and we have a new fishing newsletter coming online here soon. So I don't know when this podcast is going to run, but keep an eye out for that. That'll be a really cool thing. We've got a lot of really neat new fishing content coming out in the next couple months. So yeah, sign up for our newsletter and stay posted. I think everybody's going to love it.
Awesome, man. Well, I got to duck out of here and go and try to get a pike for dinner. So really appreciate your time, and we'll stay in touch and get out on the river here soon.
Sounds good, bud. Give me a shout if you're ever in town.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com, where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.